short introduction. So this is the agenda for today. So I will tell you a bit about Extra Living and the Extra Living Help Desk. And then we will move on to Helene's presentation about diversity and inclusion. And afterwards, if we have time, we will have some time for questions and answers. So Extra Living project focuses on habitats on a cross-sectoral dimension. So it can be home automation, welfare technology, lighting, furniture, and building and construction material. And what we are trying to do in this particular activity is to make a program of webinars addressed to SMEs and also to other cluster members. And it's to increase their competitiveness and internationalization opportunities, and essentially to enhance a smarter, more age-friendly and greener habitat value chain and its sectors. So for this particular webinar, we want to make sure that managers in different type of organizations learn more about diversity and inclusion to be able to make some strong and sustainable organizations. And just shortly, I will tell you about the Extra Living Help Desk, which is a platform where you can create a login for free. And in the platform, you can access all the different webinars that we have held in the Extra Living training program. And you get the chance to network with other entities who are interested in the same field as you. And you can ask questions to a team of advisors in the forum section of the help desk. And afterwards, I will also share the link to the recording of this webinar on the help desk. And so now for the more interesting part, we have Helene Aagaard, who's the CEO at Diversity Factor, and she will be telling us about diversity and inclusion, and especially also why it's essential for SMEs, but actually for all kinds of organizations to work with diversity and inclusion. So I will just stop my presentation, and then the word is yours, Helene.
Thank you, Nana. Lovely to see those of you who are here, and lovely to see those of you who will be seeing this recording afterwards. I'm just going to, without further ado, start sharing my screen and introduce myself. So hopefully everybody can see this screen, and I'm not pulling it up in full size right now because I got a trick so I can actually see you while I am also presenting. And some of you have your cameras turned on, and I appreciate that because I can see somebody smiling, and that's always nice when you're sitting here doing an online talk. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, the purpose of this, also as Nana just hinted to a bit in the beginning, is first of all to get to know what is diversity, what is equity, what is inclusion, what is it actually we mean when we talk about DEI or D&I. It has a lot of names. Also, what is unconscious bias and how is that playing a role when we work with diversity, equity and inclusion, and especially when we work with critical business decisions and people matters. Something I could imagine that is very important to drive that growth that SMEs want to drive. And then lastly, but not leastly, going on a positive and generous learning journey regarding this. And when I say positive, it's because it's fun and positive to learn something new. That's one thing. And this is what this 1 hour is all about. And generous, because when we work with diversity and inclusion, it's also okay to make mistakes. So that generosity really needs to come into play because this is also a new field for many businesses. Just so you know about a bit about me, I'm going to be your tour guide for the next 50 minutes or so. You can look me up on LinkedIn. There's not so many Aagaards out there, but I think it's more fun and also important to tell you that I'm Isaac's mother, Lisa and Finn's daughter, Nana and Katrine's best friend. I love reading books. I don't know how to manage a Kindle. However, I can do 30 hardbacks a year. Yeah, you can laugh all you want, Andrea, but I do not know how to do that digital reading. I love Roskilde Music Festival, and there's 1 week until we hit the grass, as we say. I love it so much. I've been coming there since I was 16, and I'm actually also a volunteer down there. So next week is my holiday season starting out. And then I used to work in Maersk and Ørsted, so there is a bit of LinkedIn here on me. Now, the reason why I share these information with you is because diversity and inclusion work is much about seeing the individual employee or the individual person, whether it's a client, a customer, or a member of our team standing in front of you, and what are their individual traits and what's important for them in their current lifespan. And how can we make sure that we have an inclusive working environment where they can fit in and don't have to change who they are and what's important for them in order to thrive in a workplace. So this is actually why we start out in that way. But let's get going for the more fun part instead of just talking about me. Now, could I get you actually to start a different place? Now, it's like, okay, this is the diversity and inclusion talk, and she's going to the zoo. But could you imagine an animal that starts with the letter E? Got that animal inside your head? Was it this fella? Anybody had an eagle? I once had a guy who had an electrical eel. I thought that was a really, really cool animal to kind of imagine. Now, what about a family? Have that family inside your head? Was it Chris and Michael? A couple based out of Bristol in the UK, very much a family. Now imagine a talent, the next talent that you're going to hire inside your organization that will help you grow. Got that talent? Was it this fella? We cheated a bit. We took Robert De Niro when he played the intern in the movie, The Intern, to kind of push where it is that we want to go with this. So last one, imagine a CEO. You got that CEO? Was it this lady? This is Melanie Elchuk. She runs her own company where she designs expressive jobs. She just raised $200 million in her last funding round. So very much a CEO. Now, when I get asked these questions, I see an eagle, or the Danish word for spider, but I also see a heterosexual couple when I get asked to imagine a family. I see a young person when I get asked to imagine a talent, and I see a man when I get asked to envision a CEO. And there's nothing wrong with that, but your brain tricks you, and it tricks you all the time. And that's because you get pounded with information, actually up to 11 million pieces of information per second. Try just to think about it. Per second, through your senses, 11 million pieces of information. This means that you simply cannot survive if you don't have what we call unconscious bias in your brain. Also mental shortcut routes that allows you to take quick and automatic decisions. Now, when you go home today from work, either you're driving in your car, or you're biking like me, and it's been a really, really warm day here in Copenhagen, and you've been on this call and you had a lot of meetings and you're tired. So you just take that automatic route, you know that route, and you kind of zoom out either on your bike or in the car, and then suddenly up ahead in the road, you see the traffic lights are shifting from green to red, and you brake. That's unconscious bias that makes you hit the brake. Now, we don't want to get rid of that. We don't want you to stopping for a red light. It's also unconscious bias that always allows you to find the milk down in the supermarket. However, when we are in critical business decisions, and that goes to whether or not we're dealing with people, recruiting, promoting, but also when we deal with vendors, investors, and so forth, we need to be conscious about our decision making. Now, I think everybody of us knows that whole function in the brain with the modern brain and the reptile brain. It is a bit similar. That things that makes you stop for a red light, that's your system 1, basically, in your brain. Also known more in modern terms like the reptile brain. It's a system that is automatic. It's unconscious, it's fast, and it's used for those everyday decisions like stopping for a red light or going to the supermarket and finding the milk. However, it's also filled with errors. And I think we all know that thing when we move to a new neighborhood and then we go down to the supermarket and they haven't designed it in the same way as this previous supermarket. And then we can't find the ketchup or the milk or the toilet paper. It's like, why did they move it? And that's because it's our system one going into the supermarket, and we think that this new supermarket is the same like the old supermarket. So you just go on your automatic gut reaction. And that's why it's also filled sometimes with errors, because then every time our brain gets exposed to new information, it can't deal. It just goes back to old habits. Now, again, as I said, there's nothing wrong with having unconscious bias because we need them. We need them for those automatic reactions like stopping for a red light. However, when you are in critical business decisions, dealing with people, you need system 2. Now, system 2 is really, really annoying because it's slow. And nobody likes it when I say you have to be slow in your decision-making process, because that doesn't ring true to efficiency in some shape or form. We like taking fast decisions. However, when we are to take conscious decisions, we actually need to think about it. And that means taking out time and tempo, so taking slow decisions. We also know that system 2 decisions require small efforts. Now, Isaac, my son, is starting first grade after the summer holidays. And during this year, he's been learning how to read and write and learning the alphabet. And it takes effort, it takes time, and it's frustrating for him. That's also why D&I needs to be a generous learning journey, because when we start using system 2, we start using a system that is required for really, really complex decisions that will also frustrate us, because we can't go back to what we did last night or yesterday or what we always have done. It requires more thought process. However, the great thing about system 2 is that if we actually use our brain to think about things, it becomes more reliable, the decisions we take long term. And that's also why you need to start working with unconscious bias is one of the first things that you do when you work with diversity and inclusion. Now, out of those 11 million pieces of information that you get pounded with per second, we know that you only actually are conscious from, and we know this from brain research, we know that you're actually only conscious about 7 to 10 of those decisions you make throughout a day. Try to think about how many decisions you actually make through a day. Just getting up, putting on the coffee machine, taking a shower. I know I at least spend 1 or 2 decisions, conscious decisions, when I'm standing in front of my closet. You can judge me all you want, but I make a conscious decision about what clothes I wear. That's just me and who I am. But if we only have 7 to 10 conscious decisions per day, can we actually say that the systems and the processes that we have designed for society and organizations, whether or not you're a big corporate or a small SME, that those are fair and just? It's a rhetorical question, of course, I'm bridging. But if we look at Denmark, it's actually more common to be named Lars or Peter if you are a CEO in one of the 1,000 biggest companies than it is to be a female. Because we all know it's about competencies and first names. Also, we know from research that Muhammad has to send 50% more applications than Martin in order to be called in for a job interview. This is research from Denmark. However, we do know that it goes approximately the same percentage numbers in the rest of Europe. In Eastern Europe, it actually increases to a higher percentage. That's a lot of talent to leave out on the street because of a name. Now, last one. 1 out of 5 Danes have experienced racism in the workplace, either directly against your own person or indirectly against a colleague. This is the same number for the rest of Europe, almost. That's a lot of discrimination going on in a workplace, potentially without us knowing. And it comes primarily from unconscious bias, because we make automatic gut reactions. However, when we work with diversity and inclusion, we have to start to learn how to work with complexity. In some countries, especially in Europe, there is a lot of conversation where diversity is equal gender diversity, and that gender diversity is then translated into more women in leadership. However, diversity is much more than that. When you start working with diversity, you start working with multi-dimensionals. Now, each of us have diversity parameters to us in some shape or form. And we can go through me, for example. I am my primary diversity parameters. I'm 41 years old. I don't have any physical disabilities. I don't have a chronic disease. I'm not in a wheelchair. I sometimes have motor skills that don't function with white clothes, aka I don't wear white because when I drink coffee, it will be on my clothes at some point in time. So therefore, no whites. But other than that, I'm good. I am my skin color, as you can see, white. My ethnicity is Jutlandish in Denmark. I did heritage research a couple of years ago with that whole DNA swapping also, and I can trace my family 2,000 years back to Jutland in the same city. We basically never moved. I think I was the first one. So that's my ethnicity. I am female and I identify as such. And then you can say, yeah, we can see that. But if you go onto Facebook today and you do a new profile, you get 72 different genders to choose from. So gender is becoming more and more invincible. I'm bisexual and I don't have any mental disabilities either. I'm not dyslexic. I don't have ADHD or whatever it could be like that. These are my primary dimensions to diversity. Some of them are visible, some of them are invincible. You can't see my sexuality, you can't see whether or not I have a mental disability. However, you can see my skin color, you can, and you have to be careful about this in some countries, but you can see my age. But when I identify as female, be careful whether or not you can see my age. We all know that. These are pretty much set in stone in some shape or form. I can't change my age. I can't change my skin color. I will still have a family history going back all the way 2,000 years in Jutland. However, the secondary dimensions to diversity, they can be changed in some shape or form. I have a master's degree from Copenhagen Business School. I am middle class, but I come from working class. So one of the things where I actually changed a diversity parameter, I speak Danish and English. I am divorced. However, I can be married again or I can have a partner. I'm single currently, but that is something that can be changed. I never went to the military, but I could do it. I don't think they will accept me, but I could try. I'm an atheist. I live in Sydhavnen in Copenhagen, and I'm Danish. So these are some of the secondary dimensions to me, not as such set in stone, depending on resources and where we are in life. We can move around with this. I could, for example, tomorrow decide that I want to dive into Buddhism and then potentially become a Buddhist. That is the diversity parameter that can be changed. Now, that is primary and secondary dimensions. However, something also goes on in a workplace, in an organization. Now, I'm the CEO right now of a company, so and it's my own. And yeah, there's only 4 employees, so CEO sounds big, but hey, we're still here. But if we look at my last job in Maersk, I sat in a fairly high job level, one of those who qualified for a company car. I worked with communications and sustainability at Esplanaden, which is the headquarters. I was not in a 9-to-5 job or in a work shift. I was from work from when the sun rises to the sun sets kind of job. I came with communication skills and stakeholder relation skills and sustainability skills, and I've been there for over 5 years. I was also a leader. I had a very work wherever kind of freedom under responsibility kind of leadership style. Still have it. I'm an A person, so my brain functions in the morning. I thrive on execution, not big on analytics. I'm an extrovert. If you look at my insights profile, it's red, 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 and then some blue, and then some yellow, and not a lot of green. And I have a very assertive communication style. So diversity parameters are also present in a work setting. Now, the thing about these diversity parameters is that, first of all, we all have them. Just looking you at screen right now, you can identify different diversity parameters to you. So diversity and inclusion is for everyone. Everyone has a stake in this and everyone gets something out of it. That's one thing. Secondly, all of these diversity parameters come with bias in some shape or form. Whether we like it or not, we all have some kind of thought process around some of these diversity parameters where we stereotype certain genders, or where we stereotype certain educations, or where we stereotype, for example, zip codes, aka geography. I, for example, have a bias towards zip codes. Don't ask me where I got it from. I was socialized in Jutland to think about people living in Copenhagen in a certain manner, depending on where their zip code was. This is my socialization. I also take an unconscious bias test via Harvard each month. And if you Google Harvard IAT, I can write it in the chat afterwards also. You basically come into a website that looks a bit like a phishing site from the 90s. And if you're in there, you know you're the right place. And you can take a lot of different bias tests. And I take one on gender and career. And Harvard will tell you, hey, take it really, really fast. It's a competition. So I sit there, it's an association test where you have to hammer on the keyboard. So I sit there and I hammer full speed ahead. And then I come out, I'm the CEO of my own company, a woman working with diversity. And I come out as heavily biased towards women, aka I think they should be at home and let men be leaders. And then I say, no, Howard, you can't trick me with your system 1. I'm going to use my system 2 now. So I slow down, aka take speed out of that process. And then I come out as neutral. So that's basically what it measures. And we all have them in some shape or form, and even I can't avoid it. So looking at these diversity parameters, and the first step to work with diversity and inclusion in any kind of organization, and specifically if you're a smaller organization wanting to grow, because then you really have a runway to succeed with this from the get-go, is to first of all identify which diversity parameters do I have, and where is there potential diversity parameters that I hold bias against, where I stereotype, where I have a prejudgment of some sort of parameter in terms of that. Does it make sense? Okay, so there is nodding and people are still with me. There's still smiles. So, okay, we're here. One of the things you can actually start to consider when you start working with diversity and inclusion is, first of all, think of it like a table. So when you're in that meeting room taking a decision, who's at the table? Is there diversity there? Or do you all have the same gender, the same skin color, the same educational background? You all live in the same neighborhood. Your dog's name is almost the same. And if you look at your personal profiles, it's pretty much alike. So is there actually diversity? You can, for example, have a 50-50 split in the room on gender, but you will still have the same personality type, the same educational background, and the dog name will still be the same. Is there then diversity in the room? So start looking when you are making critical business decisions. Who's at the table? Secondly, equity. Who built the table? Was it built by, for example, only men, thereby for their average height, or can a person with a wheelchair actually come into the table? Is it required to be in a certain dress code or a certain manner in order to sit at the table? So what are the rules of interaction around the table? AKA, who built the table? You can also look at it as a room. Are there any unwritten rules in order to enter the room with the table? Inclusion. Does everybody at the table have a microphone, basically? Is everybody welcome to speak? Or do you have to have a certain diversity parameter in order to get the microphone? And lastly, but not leastly, belonging. Is there speakers? on everybody? AKA, did we turn on the microphone? It may be that we gave Helene the microphone, but are we actually listening to what she is saying? That's about belonging. So do we value everybody's opinion equally when we are sitting there at the table? These are some of the questions you can start asking. And then sometimes I have CEOs who says to me, well, Helene, not every opinion matters equally. Mine matter more. So if you are sitting there being a leader, it's totally correct. If you are a leader, you have a responsibility and your opinion matters more. However, when you are making these decisions, do you ensure as a leader that you hear every input to the decision that you're making that you need to hear? Or are people just telling you what you want to hear? So start asking yourself these questions on a daily basis. And then if you do that, you actually start working with diversity and inclusion. And if you do that, you can make money. Now, for somebody who graduated from Copenhagen Business School, I appreciate companies who want to really make a workplace where people feel included and where they feel they can be themselves and they can put their talent into play. However, when you can make money out of that, I, as a graduate from Copenhagen Business School, also get really, really excited, because it kind of goes without saying that if you are able to lead a workplace where people can come to work as being who they are, where they don't have to have a certain diversity parameter in order to be heard, in order to be seen, they are more engaged. They will show up happier at work. They will put more effort into their work because they won't use their mental load to think about whether or not they fit in. If that engagement and that productivity comes from a diverse set of eyes, aka not the same people with the same educational background, with the same dog name, you will get more perspectives into your decision-making process, aka also what we call innovation. That will lead to better results. Now, McKinsey actually made research studies on this since 2016, showcasing that a high degree of gender representation in your leadership will lead to an outperformance of over 20% on the bottom line. And a high degree of ethnic/cultural diversity in your leadership will lead to an outperformance of your competitors with over 30% on the bottom line. That's a lot of outperformance money to leave lying on the table if you are competing in a Red Sea, as you potentially are, that you can drive home by just focusing on having more diversity in your workforce, but also in your leadership roles. However, it can be uncomfortable, and that's okay, because as I told you, I have bias towards zip codes, I have biases towards women, I have bias towards certain educations and so forth. I even found a bias the other day where I was training a global hearing aid company in inclusive leadership. And I was training their operation in India. And I assumed every leader sitting in that call were IT people because we were in India. So of course, every leader in that IT or Indian area of operation, they had to be working with IT. Half of them were from HR. This is just a bias I have. I see Indian people and in a global company, I'm like, this must be IT. So starting to figure out, where do I make gut reactions? Where do I make stereotypical thinking? Where do I have those? That can be uncomfortable. It's not nice because we thought we were these objective, neutral people who didn't judge anybody, and then we find out that we judge all the time. So be okay with that and know that even the diversity lady has them too. So it takes time. However, if you have them as an individual, they will creep into your culture, into your organization, because your organizational culture, no matter how big a company you are, is the sum of individual behavior. So if there's a default, if there is a preference for a certain dog name, or if there's a preference for a certain education in you, it will creep into your culture, into your organization, and it will become a default internally, where we say we have to have this personality type in order to become a leader, or we have to have these personality traits in order to project manage. That's a default if it's kind of a gut reaction all the time. And lastly but not leastly, it goes into our system. Now I'm divorced. The man I used to be married to has a master in computer science. And when, as he says, in terms of designing AI and machine learning, garbage in, garbage out. So if you put bias into your recruitment system, into your promotion system, into how you evaluate leaders, you will get bias out of it. It's a natural thing. And this is also why I started out in the beginning, say, hey, be generous about this learning journey, because it's okay that it takes time. It's a lot of things that we have to unravel and unpack in order to redesign, so we ensure that we can include more people in our organization. And one of the things is just that we do it. For example, if you're a hiring manager, you tend to replicate yourself. However, our employees will also replicate us. This is a typical bias often coming up because we want to be safe. But I want to share an example with you, because back in the day, when I worked in Ørsted, it used to be called, first of all, Dong Energy back then. And there was a CEO who was really, really fond of classical music. And I was like, he was going to Beethoven concerts all the time, and Mozart and Schubert and Wagner. And I was like, what is going on? And then I started noticing that his leadership team, all the senior vice presidents and the VPs, they also were going to Beethoven and listening to Schubert and Mozart. And I was like, it's because you're 29 and you're going to Roskilde Music Festival. You're going to get it. You're going to turn into a Beethoven fan at some point in time when you get older. But then we got a new CEO. He was not fond of Beethoven. No, he liked riding bikes. You know, full mammal style with the lycra, doing 100K before showing up for work. It said click, 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 click every time he walked into the office. And then all of the SVPs and the VPs stopped listening to Beethoven and started riding bikes. Yeah, people are laughing now. Yeah. We imitate also our leaders or our colleagues in order to fit in. We imitate their biases also as employees. So it's not to say, okay, yes, as a leader especially, you have to pay attention to this. You have to be sure that you're not reproducing or replicating yourself, because then you won't get that diversity. However, you also have to be aware that everybody wants to be part of the group. We want to feel like we belong. We want to feel like we're part of the organization. So how can I get a new hobby, or how can I showcase that I'm really, really fond of Champions League in order to talk to everybody at the coffee machine or at lunch and so forth. So we will also imitate. So when working with the inclusion, it's about allowing that you can listen to Beethoven, or you can ride bikes, or you can do Champions League, or you could go to Roskilde Music Festival. It doesn't matter. You still get the microphone at the meeting and you still have speakers on it. So that's what we need to ensure, that bias is not tricking us, either as leaders when we take critical business decisions, but that we also create a working environment where people can actually be themselves, no matter their diversity parameter. And again, yeah, inclusion is to ensure that everybody can be their true self. So what are it then that you're supposed to do? Where are these moments that actually matter? Where are you focusing on when you start working with diversity and inclusion? Recruitment, for example. Do you recruit only from a certain educational institute? Are you recruiting only a certain gender? Are you recruiting only a certain personality type? What is your pipeline looking like? Now, I know some companies will have a harder time recruiting diversity because the pipeline is screwed because of education. And this is a bias, but it's easier to get women if you are running, for example, if you're looking for a nurse, than it is if you're looking for a computer scientist. It's just this, there is a screwed pipeline issue for some things, but you can, for example, do case-based recruiting, or you can blind some of the blind your CVs when you are recruiting. For example, stop using LinkedIn. It's filled with bias. Just when we look at a picture, it takes us 30 seconds to judge a person. So don't use pictures on LinkedIn. For example, remove zip codes, remove age, and so forth from your recruitment process. When you develop people, AKA, do you say, in order to grow and develop in my organization or in this organization, you have to be a bit like me? Or do you actually allow them to harvest and push their talent and their competencies out? I have a bias in terms, or I have a preference for people who work in the same manner as I do. I like people who sit down and then they start at A and then they make a plan and then they execute on it and then we have a result. I prefer that. Why? Because it's the same way as I work. Now I have an employer or an employee or colleague, Veronica. She doesn't have that process. I call her loopy, basically. She starts here and then she goes back and then she goes up here and then she goes down here and then she kind of goes back to the starting point, I feel. And then she's like, can we spar a bit on this? And then she loops around like this. And then at some point in time, she will finish and there will be an end result. But her process is different. I find it really, really hard to work with her. So also I find it really, really hard to develop her because she's not like me. However, she's very, very good at her job. She's very, very skilled and competent within the things she's hired to do. So how do I, as a leader, ensure that she still get the cool development projects, that she's still on the right clients, on the right courses and so forth, even though she doesn't have the same working style as I do? So this is also something you can think about. And this especially goes back to when you evaluate their performance. Are you evaluating yourself or are you evaluating what they actually did? It's really, really hard to give feedback, especially constructive feedback to other people, because if it's critical, we don't really like it. That's one thing. Number two, how do we actually evaluate somebody else's performance? Do we evaluate it based on how we would have done it? Or do we evaluate it on the actual result that was come up? We know from research that men get promoted on expectations to result, whereas women gets promoted on results. So as a woman, you have to showcase that you actually done something. As a man, you just have to say you want to do something. So how do we take that, for example, that bias into our evaluation of our team members? And this also goes into when you adjust salaries. Now, if you are operating in the EU and you have a company size that is larger than 250 people, you will now be exposed to the Pay Equity Transparency Directive from the EU, which means that you can't have a gender gap salary or gender pay gap be above 5%. That will lead to a fine. And you have to be transparent to all your employees about what the different salary levels are for each job band. So this is something that compliance-wise is coming out of the EU if you're above 250 people. But biases also creeps in there. So it's also about when you identify talents, high potentials. Now I have a thing, again, with my preference. I always say that the talent is the person that is a bit like me, because I'm good. So if you're like me, you're probably good too. So again, start checking yourself for these. And yes, especially when you promote and also reorganize. So these are kind of the first steps into where is it that I'm focusing on my work? Where is the moments that matters when you start working with diversity, equity, and inclusion? These are critical business decision moments that matters, everything related to people. However, when you dive deeper into this conversation and you got your whole people side under control, we do see companies also starting to work with this from a vendor perspective or from an investment perspective. So some of my clients, which are big corporations, you can't be a vendor to them unless you can showcase that you are actually working with diversity and inclusion and that you are focusing on this. So this is something that will either come as a regulation through institutions like the EU or local legislation in your markets. but it can also come from clients and companies that you are working for because they will require it as a vendor selection. So where do you start? First of all, nobody knows where to go if they don't know where they're starting. So start pulling data. So what is our representation like inside the company? What is our leadership looking like? On our website, you can download a dialogue tool where you can actually go through the different diversity parameters that you have in your team. So start pulling data and seeing, okay, how many genders do we have? How is our age representation? What is our nationality? What does our personality testing look like? And so forth. What is our engagement survey saying? Do you run a cultural survey on your workforce to say, okay, do I feel included? And so forth. So start pulling data. At the end of the day, sometimes somebody says to me, hey, D&I, it's just about time, Helene. Then we can see from history that it's just about time evolving. Nobody ever expanded to a new export market by just saying it was just about time. If I want to go to and expand my business to Germany, I don't sit down and say it will come. No, I sit down, I make a plan, I execute on that plan, and then I expand to the German market. I don't wait around for an office showing up in Berlin. So again, start with data, make a plan and execute for them. Biases. Again, we all have them. It's okay. You need them. You need them to stop at that red light. You need them in order to find the milk. But where do you have them in critical business decisions? And where can you then be aware of when they are tricking you to, for example, make a poor decision? Compassion. It's a funny thing that this is actually something that is on the page, but a lot of biases can actually be hindered if you are curious and compassionate about the people you meet. You don't have to walk a day in their shoes, but knowing that I'm Isaac's mother, Lisa and Finn's daughter, Nana and Katrine's best friend, that says something about me as a human and as an individual. And if you know these things about your people, you start being compassionate about them, and you be curious about where they are in their life and what they need in order to succeed. And that drives away a lot of biases, and it also makes for a good working relationship. Now, representation. This is not only in terms of your top leadership, but what is your corporate website looking like? Are there the same people in the pictures? Is it all white men, for example? Or can you see diversity just on the website? Is it in your marketing material? Is it in your procurement material? And so forth. When we had the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, the Danish Prime Minister, who's a woman, held a lot of press briefings here in Denmark. And she was on telly all the time. And my son, who was 4 at the time, he looked at me at some point in time and then he said, "Mommy, can boys also become prime ministers?" Representation matters. So if they can see it, they can be it. So if you, for example, want to attract more women into your organization, show them that there is actually a place for them. If you want to attract more cultural diversity into your organization, show it, tell it. So representation matters. And then again, back to learning. It's 2 steps forwards, 1 step back, and you're gonna make mistakes, and it's okay. It will come with time, so accept that it's a patient learning journey, and that in that 1 step back and in that mistake, you actually learn a lot that will drive the journey even forward. And then lastly, but not leastly, as I said, some companies are putting this into their vendor selection. This is a business discipline. It's not an HR project. This has to be run from top leadership. In any organization, whether you're big or small, there has to be a top-down commitment in order for this to succeed. And you can also it doesn't have to be big things, but you can actually also do something on an individual level tomorrow if you want to. Remember that table where those decisions are being made? Try asking the quiet person in the meeting room what they think. Give away the microphone, especially if you are the one with the default diversity parameters. Stop interrupting. Everybody knows when they're at home, if they have a partner and they're in an argument and they get interrupted, that's the most annoying thing we can do to each other. The same rules apply in a workplace. Privileges. If you are one of those people who has the default education, the default gender, the default age, the default dog name, the default zip code in your organization, you are privileged. That's nice to be the one who listens to Beethoven if everybody else also does it. So recognize if you are the one with the most status and start seeing others. So are there some people who are actually listening to Beethoven in your organization, even though they're a hardcore Metallica fan? That is privilege. Fourth, be aware of food and drink options at social gatherings. Some Danes, especially if I look at my own culture here in Denmark, we're very fond of beer. We really, really like beer here in Denmark. And not everybody likes beer. That's one thing. Some don't drink it because of a diversity parameter, like, for example, religion. But they could also be pregnant, for example. And then it's a big exclusion thing that in order to be social, you have to do beers, for example, in Denmark. So what are some of the cultural traits in your area of operation where there may be something that you need to look at in order to make it more inclusive? Say partner or significant other instead of just assuming that everybody is straight. There's a funny thing where heterosexuals actually jump out of the closet all the time because they talk about who they're married to all the time. But we don't recognize it as such because it's the 90% of it. So just start allowing other people to speak their truth before assuming that they are like you. You can also add your pronouns to your email signature or your LinkedIn profile. Now, if you identify within your same gender, it doesn't really matter for you. It's not something that takes away a lot of your energy. But if you, for example, use the pronouns they, them, and is identify as a non-binary, then when you show that this is something that you have actually thought about, taking into account, and you display that, it shows that you are actively working within this agenda. And this is something that you're conscious about. So it's an easy fix to actually showcase that you can drive more inclusion in your organization. And then again, it's learning. It's not a quick fix. You're not going to solve this by just adding up the number of women in your leadership. Because if you add up the number of women in your leadership and all of them, again, have the same educational background and the same dog name, it's not diversity. And then start talking about it. Start scaling awareness. Start sharing your own biases. In my company, we throw candy when we find a new bias. It's a way to celebrate, actually. It's a bit like dog training, you know, every time the dog does something good, he gets a piece of something. It's kind of similar. So it's behavioral design. But the reason why we do it is because we want it to be positive. We want it to be generous. We want it to be fun. So every time I discover a new bias, I get a piece of candy. And every time I discover a bias with one of my colleagues, I get to throw candy at them. So it's a way to kind of be aware and be conscious about your biases, but it's also a way to have fun with it. Because again, we all have them. So when are they playing a trick on us, or when can we actually use them in order to stop for a red light? So is there any questions? Are there any comments? Are there anybody like, no, I don't want to do this, or yay, this sounds great. How can I do more? And it's also okay if you don't have any questions.
At least I think it sounds great, but that's maybe obvious since I planned the webinar. But yeah, I would like to hear what some of the other listeners are thinking about it. Andrea?
I'm not sure if it's working.
Yeah,
the microphone.
Yep.
Oh, great. I wanted to ask you, in your encounters and experience regarding this topic, the equivalent of greenwashing as it's happening now with pretending and having this as a marketing strategy. but not having real system of evaluating internally. So what do you think about this? And I think it, in my opinion, is still helpful for the cause, but at the same time, it can lose the real purpose.
I get it. We call it either purple or pink washing when it's diversity washing. Then it's purple or pink washing. However, a lot of the companies who were accused of greenwashing back in the days when that whole climate and energy and sustainability agenda around CO2 started rolling, they were actually doing something. There are actually some of the companies who are further ahead right now than other companies. So I think if you're not doing anything at all, don't plaster your website with women and Black people and so forth. However, everybody has to start somewhere. And I think a lot of the washing accusations comes from either media or people who don't actually know. But just the fact that you are on this webinar right now and actually having this conversation and listening into it is a first step in something, doing actually something. So I wouldn't be so afraid of being accused of either pink or purple washing. I would just, hey, let's try to do something, and then maybe we will fail, but then we learn something, and let's try a new thing. So go for it. Yeah.
And Julio, you also have a question?
Yes, first of all, thank you, Ellen, for this very nice webinar. And I have a question. So, in relation to equity and inclusion, I think that for a company, I think that the more, the better. So, but in relation to diversity, I believe in diversity, but maybe a lot of diversity would be difficult to manage, and maybe from an operational point of view, it could be difficult. So I'm not sure if in relation to diversity, you need to let me say, to have some diversity, but not too much diversity. Otherwise, till now, we have been talking about sharing a vision, sharing a mission, sharing some values, having the same purpose. And this is also, let me say, it could work with a lot of diversity, or it could be good to analyze what amount of diversity you need in your company. Thank you.
Julio, thank you for that. I actually agree, because you need to start with the culture and the systems and structures, aka the equity first. So inclusion and equity first, because at the end of the day, if you go out and hire for a lot of diversity and then they come into your culture and they're like, hey, I can't be included here, they're gonna up and leave again, and that's expensive. It's expensive to lose employees. But as you say, diversity is a lot. It's and learning how to manage all of that complexity takes time. So no, just don't fill up your companies with red, blue, green, and then a small person and a tall person and a lot of different genders. You need to be able to have the culture and the structures that can actually deal with that complexity, that can run with that complexity. And it's also okay for an organization to say, hey, these are our boundaries. This is what our community, or this is what our culture looks like in the organization. What I just want to make sure of is that when you are in those critical business decisions, that you're not taking automatic gut reactions. But you can still set boundaries, but work with your inclusion level and your equity level first. Yes, always. And then learn how much diversity can I actually take in.
Yeah. Do we have more questions? No, it doesn't look like it. Then I just want to say thank you so much, Helene, for the interesting presentation. I learned a lot, and I hope all the other participants did as well. And yeah, I will be sharing the presentation and the recording, and also send you the contact details of Helene if you have